You have read the books. You have watched the videos. You have tried the routines, the systems, the habits. And something still isn't working. This is not a motivation problem. This is not a discipline problem. This is a knowledge problem. Not lack of knowledge. Wrong knowledge. After 100 books on psychology, philosophy, human behavior, and change, the same discovery keeps appearing. Every book teaches the same 20 things. Most people absorb them intellectually. Nobody actually lives them. That changes today. 20 lessons. Everything that matters. Let's begin. Lesson 1. The story you tell yourself about why you can't is the only thing actually stopping you. Before we talk about systems, habits, or strategy, we need to talk about something more fundamental. The story. Every person walking around with a life that isn't working has a story. A story about why things are the way they are. Why change is difficult for them specifically. Why their circumstances are different. Why what works for other people won't work for them. And the story is always convincing. It contains real events, real pain, real obstacles. It is not fabricated. But here's what nobody tells you about your story. The story is not the truth. It is an interpretation. And interpretations can be changed. The man who says, "I can't be disciplined because of how I grew up," is telling a story. A story that may contain real facts, but a story nonetheless. Because there are men who grew up in identical circumstances who became extraordinarily disciplined, which means the circumstances are not the determining factor. The story about the circumstances is the moment you change the story, not to something false, not to toxic positivity, but to something more accurate. This has been hard for me, and I am capable of changing it. Everything that follows becomes possible. The story is not your history. It is your operating system, and operating systems can be updated. Lesson 2. Most of your beliefs were inherited, not chosen. Here is something nobody tells you when you are young. The beliefs that run your life, the beliefs about what success looks like, what you are capable of, what you deserve, what is possible for someone like you, were not chosen by you. They were installed by your parents, by your school, by your culture, by the people around you when you were too young to filter what you were absorbing. And most people spend their entire lives running on software they never agreed to install. They chase careers they don't want because success was defined for them before they could define it for themselves. They shrink in rooms where they should stand tall because someone once told them, directly or indirectly, that they were not the kind of person who belonged there. They set limits on what they can achieve that have nothing to do with their actual capacity. The most important question you can ask yourself right now is not, how do I improve? It is, do the beliefs I am operating from actually belong to me? Because you cannot build your life on a foundation someone else laid without your permission. Examine what you believe, not what you think you should believe. What you actually, quietly, deeply believe about yourself and your life. Because that is what is actually running the show. Lesson 3. The man you become in private is the man who shows up in public. Most people are focused entirely on the external performance, how they show up in the room, how they are perceived, what impression they make. But the external performance is not something you can construct. It is something you reveal. What you reveal in public is always the sum of who you are in private. The man who is undisciplined when nobody is watching will be undisciplined under pressure when everyone is watching. The man who cuts corners in his private work will cut corners when it matters. The man who is dishonest with himself in the quiet moments will be dishonest with others in the critical moments. And the reverse is equally true. The man who holds himself to a standard when there is no audience, when there is no reward, no recognition, no applause, that man is building something real, something that cannot be faked when the moment arrives. Because the moment always arrives. And when it does not ask you to perform. It asks you to reveal, who are you, when nobody is watching, because that person is who you actually are. And that person is who will show up when it counts. Lesson 4. Most men confuse being busy with making progress. This one is uncomfortable because busyness feels like progress. It has all the sensations of productivity, the full calendar, the constant motion, the exhaustion at the end of the day that feels like proof of effort. But busyness and progress are not the same thing, and confusing them is one of the most common and most costly mistakes a person trying to fix their life can make. Progress is movement towards something specific that matters to you. Busyness is movement, just movement, in any direction, on any task, toward any outcome. The man who answers emails for 8 hours has been busy. The man who spent 2 hours on the single most important thing his life requires right now has made progress. Ask yourself honestly, at the end of most days, are you tired because you moved your life forward? Or are you tired because you were in motion? Because motion without direction is just exhaustion. And exhaustion without progress is one of the most demoralizing experiences a person can have. It makes you feel like you are working hard and going nowhere. Because you are. Identify the one thing, not 10 things, not 5 things. The one thing that would move your life forward most significantly right now, and do that first, every single day, before the busyness begins. Lesson 5. 1 focused hour beats 10 distracted hours every single time. Closely connected to the last lesson, but distinct enough to deserve its own. We live in the most distracted era in human history. The average person's attention is being pulled in more directions simultaneously than at any other point in the history of the species. Notifications, feeds, messages, content, noise. All of it competing for the one resource that is finite and irreplaceable, your attention. And most people have never been taught, genuinely taught, how to focus, how to give one thing their complete, undivided, sustained attention for an extended period. Because that skill, the skill of focused attention, is the skill that separates people who actually produce things from people who are always almost producing things. The research is unambiguous. Deep focused work for 1 hour produces more meaningful output than 10 hours of fragmented, distracted, interrupted work. Not slightly more, dramatically more. Because the quality of your attention determines the quality of your output. And the quality of your output determines the quality of your results. And the quality of your results determines the quality of your life. Protect your attention, like the finite resource it is. Because everyone and everything around you is trying to take it. And most of them will succeed unless you decide otherwise. Lesson 6. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. Every person who has ever set a goal and failed to achieve it has been told the same thing. You didn't want it badly enough. You weren't committed enough. You needed more willpower. And that advice is not just wrong, it is actively harmful, because it locates the problem in the person rather than in the structure. The truth, supported by decades of research in behavioral psychology, is this: you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Goals are directions. Systems are the actual mechanism of change. The person who wants to get fit, but has no system for when, where, and how they train will fail. Not because they don't want it, but because wanting is not a system. The person who wants to build a business, but has no system for protected deep work hours will fail. Not because they lack ambition, but because ambition is not a system. Stop asking yourself how much you want something. Start asking yourself what system you have in place to make that thing inevitable. Because a mediocre goal with an excellent system will always outperform an excellent goal with no system. Always. Lesson 7. The person who starts before they're ready always beats the person waiting to feel ready. Nobody feels ready. Not the person who built the company. Not the person who wrote the book. Not the person who had the difficult conversation that changed everything. Nobody felt ready. They started anyway. And this is not motivational language. It is a practical observation about how readiness actually works. Readiness is not a prerequisite for starting. It is a result of starting. You do not feel ready and then begin. You begin and then, through the action itself, you develop the competence and the confidence that feeling ready requires. The person waiting to feel ready before they start is waiting for something that starting is the only way to create. It is a loop with no entry point except action. And the longer you wait, the more evidence your mind accumulates that you are not ready. Because you haven't started. Because you don't have the data that starting would give you. Every single person you admire who has built something worthwhile started before they were ready. They were afraid. They were uncertain. They didn't have all the answers. They started anyway. That is the only difference between them and the person still waiting. Lesson 8. The only guaranteed way to fail is to never start. Short, simple, uncomfortable. Every other form of failure contains information. The attempt that didn't work teaches you something about why it didn't work. The business that failed teaches you something about business, about yourself, about what not to do next time. The relationship that ended teaches you something about what you need, what you offer, what you should look for. Failure, in almost every form, is data. Expensive data sometimes, painful data, but data. The only failure that teaches you nothing, the only failure that contains no information, generates no growth, produces no lessons, is the failure to try. The unlived life, the unstarted project, the unsent message, the unattempted thing. That is the only guaranteed failure. Because everything else, every attempt, every risk, every beginning contains within it the possibility of success. And even when it doesn't succeed, it contains the possibility of learning. The only thing that contains neither is inaction. Lesson 9. The thing you keep avoiding is almost always the thing that would change everything. There is a pattern that appears in almost every person who feels stuck, without exception. The thing they are avoiding is almost always the thing that holds the key to what they want most. The conversation they won't have, the decision they won't make, the risk they won't take, the honest assessment of their life they won't sit with long enough to actually hear. And the avoidance is sophisticated. It doesn't announce itself as fear. It disguises itself as being busy, as being practical, as needing more preparation before acting, as waiting for the right moment. But underneath all of that sophistication is something very simple: fear. Not the dramatic fear of danger, the quiet fear of what you will find if you stop running. What you will have to admit about your life, what you will have to change, what you will have to lose. The most reliable compass you have for the direction your life needs to move in is this: what are you avoiding right now? Not what do you need to do. What are you avoiding? Because the answer to that question is almost always where your life is waiting for you. Lesson 10. The 5 people around you are setting the invisible ceiling of your life. No book about success will say this as directly as it needs to be said. The people you spend the most time with are not just influencing your mood. They are setting the boundaries of what you believe is possible. Every day, you exist inside a social environment that is constantly, quietly, invisibly, calibrating your sense of what is normal. What is a normal level of ambition? What is a normal amount of money to make? What is a normal way to spend your time? What is a normal set of expectations for your life? And if the people around you have calibrated those things at a level below what you are capable of, then the single most impactful thing you could do for your life has nothing to do with habits or productivity systems. It has to do with proximity. This does not mean abandoning everyone around you. It means being honest about the invisible influence your environment is having on your ceiling, because you cannot consistently rise above the level your environment considers normal, not without enormous resistance, not without fighting your own sense of belonging every single day. The ceiling is not inside you. It is around you. Change what is around you, and the ceiling moves. Lesson 11. Repetition rewires your brain. This is not metaphor. This is neuroscience. Every time you perform an action, a neural pathway in your brain is activated. Every time you repeat that action, the pathway becomes slightly stronger. Every time you repeat it again, stronger still. Until eventually, through enough repetition, what was once difficult becomes automatic. What required conscious effort becomes unconscious habit. What felt unnatural becomes default. This process works in both directions. The thought you repeat becomes the belief you hold. The action you repeat becomes the person you are. The response you practice becomes the response you default to under pressure, which means that who you are is not fixed. It is not determined by your history or your genetics or your circumstances. It is determined by what you repeatedly do, think, and practice. And that means it is changeable. Not quickly, not easily, but absolutely. If you repeat the right things long enough, your brain will make them automatic. And automatic is the only level of change that actually sticks. Lesson 12. Good and bad habits. Both compound over time. This lesson is the other side of the last one. And it is the one most people would prefer not to think about too carefully. The habits you have right now are compounding. Every single one of them. The good ones are quietly building something. More discipline, more health, more clarity, more capability. The bad ones are also quietly building something. More distraction, more stagnation, more distance between who you are and who you could be. And the compounding works slowly enough that the effects are invisible day to day. The person who scrolls for 2 hours every evening does not feel the compounding today. They feel it in 5 years, when their attention span has shortened, when their tolerance for difficulty has decreased, when they look back and realize they traded thousands of hours of their life for nothing that compounded in their favor. The question to ask about every habit, every single one, is this: if I do this every day for 5 years, what does it build? And if the answer is nothing you want, the habit needs to go. Not because one day matters, but because every day matters, and the compounding never stops. Lesson 13. Consistency outperforms everything else. Talent, intelligence, resources, connections, opportunity. All of it is outperformed, over time, by consistency. This is one of the most documented findings across every field of human achievement. and one of the most resisted. Because consistency is unglamorous. It doesn't feel like a superpower. It feels like showing up again when you don't want to. Doing the work again when the motivation is gone. Choosing the hard thing again when the easy thing is right there. But here is what consistency produces that nothing else can: compounding. The person who shows up every day, imperfectly, inconsistently in quality, but consistently in presence, builds something over time that the person who shows up brilliantly and then disappears never will. Because compounding requires continuity. Break the chain and the compound effect resets. The most important question about any practice, any goal, any direction you want to move your life in is not, can I do this brilliantly? It is, can I do this consistently? Because done consistently and imperfectly over years will always beat done brilliantly and sporadically over the same period. Always. Lesson 14. Being a man of your word is the fastest way to build real self-esteem. Most people look for self-esteem in external places: validation, achievement, recognition, the approval of people they respect. And those things can feel good temporarily, but they are not the foundation of genuine self-esteem. Because genuine self-esteem, the kind that doesn't collapse under pressure, the kind that doesn't require constant maintenance, the kind that makes you calm in rooms where others are anxious, that self-esteem comes from one place only: your relationship with your own word. When you say you will do something and you do it, not for anyone else, not because someone is watching, but because you said you would, you send yourself a message that says, I am someone who can be trusted, even by myself. And that message, repeated over time, through small, kept promises, small acts of follow-through, small moments of doing the difficult thing because you said you would, builds a foundation that no external validation can create or destroy. Start small, say less, mean more. Follow through completely, and watch what it does to how you see yourself. Lesson 15. Being fearless is a hoax. Courage comes from facing your fears. The most damaging myth in the self-improvement space is the idea of fearlessness. The fearless entrepreneur, the fearless leader, the man who is afraid of nothing. It is a fantasy, and it is a harmful one, because it creates a standard that no human being can meet, and then makes every person who feels fear believe they are somehow inadequate. The truth is this: every person who has built something, done something, become something, was afraid. They felt the fear as clearly as you feel it, and they acted anyway. Not because they eliminated the fear, but because they decided that the fear was not a stop sign. It was information. Information that said, this matters. Because you don't feel fear about things that don't matter. Fear is not the enemy of courage. It is the prerequisite. You cannot be courageous without being afraid first. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something matters more than the fear. The question is never, am I afraid? You will always be afraid of the things that matter. The question is, will I act anyway? Lesson 16. You can force your body to change your mind. This is one of the most practical and underutilized insights in all of psychology. Most people believe the sequence works like this: change your thinking, then change your behavior. Feel motivated, then act. Get clear first, then move. But the research and the experience of every person who has actually changed their life suggests the sequence often works in the opposite direction. Act first. Clarity follows. Force the body to move, and the mind catches up. The person who does not want to work out but goes anyway, 5 minutes in, the resistance is already softening. The person who does not feel like starting but opens the document anyway. 10 minutes in, they are working. The body leads, the mind follows. This is not always true, and it is not a substitute for genuine clarity and direction, but it is one of the most reliable tools available to the person who is stuck in their own head, waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel motivated, waiting for the mind to give them permission. Stop waiting for the mind. Move the body. The mind will catch up. Lesson 17. Indecision is a decision. Inaction is an action. This lesson is short, but the implications are enormous. Every moment you spend not deciding is a decision. The decision to let circumstances decide for you, the decision to let time decide, the decision to let other people's momentum carry you somewhere you never consciously chose to go. Every moment you spend not acting is an action. The action of staying where you are. The action of allowing the current situation to continue. The action of choosing the status quo. There is no neutral position. There is no waiting room outside of your life. Where your choices don't count, every moment is counting. Whether you are conscious of it or not, this is not pressure for the sake of pressure. It is clarity. The clarity of understanding that your life is not on pause while you decide. It is moving in the direction of your defaults, of your avoidances, of your indecisions. The question is not whether you are choosing. You are always choosing. The question is whether you are choosing deliberately. Lesson 18. Not everything needs to be fixed. This lesson sits differently from all the others, because everything else in this video is about change, about becoming, about improving, about closing the gap between where you are and where you could be. And all of that matters. But there is a version of self-improvement that becomes its own problem. The person who is so focused on fixing themselves that they can never simply be themselves, who treats every flaw as a project, every weakness as an emergency, every imperfection as evidence of inadequacy. That is not growth. That is self-rejection, with a productivity system attached to it. Not everything about you needs to be optimized. Not every part of your life needs to be upgraded. Some things are fine as they are. Some parts of you are not flaws to be corrected, but features to be accepted. The goal is not a perfect person. The goal is a person who is honest with themselves about what genuinely needs to change, and equally honest about what is simply human. Pursue growth, but do not confuse growth with the belief that who you currently are is not enough. You are enough, and you are capable of more. Both things are true at the same time. Lesson 19. Other people are too busy thinking about themselves to think about you. One of the most liberating lessons in all of psychology, and one of the hardest to actually believe. The thing you are most afraid of, the embarrassing attempt, the failed project, the awkward moment, the thing you did that you can't stop thinking about. Other people are not thinking about it. They were not thinking about it an hour after it happened. They have their own embarrassing attempts, failed projects, awkward moments, and things they can't stop thinking about. The psychological phenomenon behind this is called the spotlight effect. The tendency to believe that other people are paying far more attention to you than they actually are. And it is responsible for an enormous amount of paralysis. People not starting because they are afraid of what others will think. People not speaking because they are afraid of how they will be perceived. People not trying because they cannot survive the imagined judgment of an audience that is mostly not watching. The freedom available on the other side of genuinely internalizing this lesson, that most people are far too occupied with their own lives to scrutinize yours, is one of the most practically liberating shifts a person can make. Start, try, Fail publicly if necessary. Almost nobody is watching as closely as you think, and the ones who are usually too afraid to try themselves. Lesson 20. Failure teaches you more than anything else. The last lesson. And in many ways, the most important. Because everything in this video, every lesson, every insight, every reframe, will at some point require you to attempt something and fail. And how you respond to that failure will determine everything that follows. Most people treat failure as evidence. Evidence that they are not capable. Evidence that they were wrong to try. Evidence that the attempt should not be repeated. And that interpretation of failure is the only thing that makes failure truly destructive. Because failure itself is not the problem. Failure is information. The most direct, most specific, most personalized information available to you about exactly what needs to change. Every person who has built something significant has failed more times than they can count. Not despite the failures, because of them. Because each failure taught them something that success never could. What doesn't work. Who they are under pressure. What they actually want versus what they thought they wanted. The willingness to fail, to try, to fall short, to learn, to try again, is not a consolation prize for people who couldn't succeed. It is the mechanism of success itself. The only people who never fail are the people who never try. And we have already covered what that costs. Hundreds of books, 20 lessons. That is all of it. Not because the books weren't valuable, but because a library of knowledge that never becomes action is just an expensive way to stay in the same place. You have been trying to fix your life. Stop. Not because fixing is wrong, but because your life does not need to be fixed. It needs to be built. And building requires a different relationship with yourself than fixing does. Fixing starts from the assumption that something is broken. Building starts from the assumption that something is possible. You are not broken. You are at the beginning of something. The version of you that applies even 3 of these 20 lessons consistently. Not perfectly. Consistently. Will look back at this moment and understand exactly why it mattered. The world did not break you. It only distracted you from becoming yourself. And the moment that changes, everything changes. If this made sense to you, you already know why you're here. We'll talk again.